Hi, this is Stephanie Stock, President of Ohio Advocates for Medical Freedom and an advocate for conservative policy and the protection of our constitutional liberties. Welcome to Stephanie Stock Straight Up. Today, we are with Governor candidate Vivek Ramaswamy and Representative Jennifer Gross. Vivek is a father of three who grew up in Ohio and became an entrepreneur and business owner who got tired of seeing Ohio fall behind other states and decided to get off the sidelines and make a difference in Ohio policy by running for governor. And know Rep Gross for being a champion bill sponsor for pretty much most of OAMF's legislation since 2021, and our joint sponsor for our newest piece of legislation, the Data Center Accountability and Citizen Protection Act. She's a nurse practitioner and a military combat veteran who has been a bold conservative voice for the people since she took office. So thank you guys both for being here. I know everybody's very excited to hear from you both, and especially from you, Vivek. I think it's a great opportunity to really get your stance and take a deep dive into this topic. Before we start, you're welcome. You're welcome. Before we get into that deep dive, I'd love to open with just kind of asking you, you're basically, what do you believe medical freedom is? And also, what did you see were the top lessons from COVID, and why is it so vital that we protect citizens' medical liberty both now and for future generations? So Vivek, maybe you want to start first, and then Jen, you hop on after.
Sounds great.
Yeah, I mean, look, I want to thank you for what you do, Stephanie. And I think it's important to stand for medical freedom because pre-COVID, it was actually a forgotten issue. I think after COVID, if there's one good thing to come out of it, I think that it's people's awakening about the importance of personal medical autonomy and medical freedom. To me, it means basically, if I'm to simplify it, two things. It means that you should not be forced to do something to your body that you don't want to do. And you should have the right to try something, particularly a medication, a life-saving medication, if you want to, even if the government hasn't yet formally approved it. To me, those are the core pillars of medical freedom: the right to try and the right not to try, to make it really simple. And I think COVID was an interesting test that forced us all of us, to evaluate what our actual convictions are. And I think there are so many learnings from that 3-year period in Ohio and across the country. And for me, I put them in a couple of different categories. I think the first category relates to, and I was hearing you give your show introduction, I was happy you to mention constitutional rights at the beginning. The first lesson is that our constitutional rights are not just made for the easy times. The constitutional rights and their protections exist for when times actually get really difficult. That's what the moments they were made for. And just one example we think about even in the last week, right, watching Fauci's testimony on Capitol Hill, is that basic principle of freedom of speech in the United States of America. And we could have a whole separate podcast or discussion around this. I actually wrote a near whole book about it, Woke Inc., my first book. But the basic principle is one of the things we saw during COVID was the government was using private threats to social media companies, to internet companies, to censor speech through the back door that the government could not censor through the front door under the Constitution. That came out in the Twitter files and the litigation and the Missouri litigation that followed. But what did we learn? What were they censoring? They were censoring you saying that the virus originated in a lab in Wuhan, where what do we know? The virus actually originated in a lab in Wuhan. They were censoring medical professionals who criticized school lockdowns. Well, what do we know? Those school lockdowns actually caused more health harm than they ever prevented. And we could have known that at the time if we were allowed to talk about it. And so to me, that's probably number one lesson, is our constitutional rights, including freedom of speech, is meant for the difficult times. In times of so-called emergency, that's exactly when it's meant for, rather than the moment where those rights are to be suspended. And relatedly, I think a second lesson that we all ought to learn, and maybe some of these are, freshly on my head because of watching the Fauci hearings last week. There is no such thing as a noble lie. Okay, no matter how noble you think you're being when lying to the public, there's no such thing as a noble lie. The job of a public leader is to tell citizens the truth. And if you don't know the truth, then tell them that you don't know, but don't lie to them. And the idea that you're doing someone a favor by telling them something that's a lie is itself a betrayal, the greatest betrayal of trust. And I could say a lot about where not only Anthony Fauci, but my opponent, Amy Acton, in this race falls in that regard. And I think a related point to the fact there's no noble lie is also a recognition that as leaders, we're all human beings. And at the end of the day, human beings can make mistakes, and that's okay, as long as you admit those mistakes and you're willing to learn from them. And I think that too is one of the failures of, people like Fauci and Acton, who we can talk about later. To me, those are some of the core learnings from the pandemic. Is that's the moment that our constitutional rights are actually made for, so-called emergency moments. Tell people the truth. There's no such thing as a noble lie. And by the way, if you make a mistake or you were wrong, admit it and learn from it in the open. That's how we're going to get better. And I could go on. You could go tether to the facts rather than the narratives about the facts. There's a lot of other learnings. But to me, those are the three key takeaways for COVID. And I think for the importance of protecting medical freedom in the future, that certainly I personally took away from those years. And definitely those lessons will inform the way that I lead this state after I'm elected.
Great. And I agree with you that the free speech was a huge issue. And if the truth had been told, I think we would have been in a very, very different place. Jen, why don't you go ahead and tell us?
I don't know that I can capitalize or do better than what Vivek just said, but what I do is I agree with him in everything that he just said. There was something our current governor said, and he said that Americans, Ohioans, had to earn back their freedom by wearing a mask. We were born free as Americans, and constitutionally, our right to life, liberty, is worth fighting for. And I think that what we saw during COVID was an experiment, if you will, to see what Americans will do when you try to take our freedoms away. As Vivek said, the Constitution is for those days when the time is the toughest. And we saw this with the European Union and people saying that we were going to give away our rights to the World Health Organization and whatnot. But ultimately, the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness should be left in the citizen to make a good choice or a bad choice, but it isn't our decision to make for each individual in Ohio. It was up to them to make their decision, the best decision for them, their families, and their children. And that's what I would say, as well as one last thing. Informed consent in healthcare needs to be vitally protected. And the right to try, as Vivek was saying, in HB 12, which I'm a sponsor of, fits that bill. No pun intended, but those things are really valuable. And lastly, I would also like to say children were harmed. The lockdowns put young children who are looking at faces of their parents, trying to learn how to form words. Education, we lost as something that Vivek is promoting for a better education in Ohio. We took many years step back due to the way that Amy acted, locked down our state. And the harm needs to be fixed, and we need to move forward and learn from our challenges. So that's all I have to say.
I agree, Jen. Thank you so much. Okay, so let's get into the next section here. You both have backgrounds and stories and kind of histories that dabble in the pharmaceutical industry. Some people in our movement, they consider that contradictory to medical freedom. However, you guys are both clearly outspoken on the issue of personal choice with regards to treatment options and vaccines. So let's start with both of you spending a couple of minutes describing your backgrounds and involvement with pharma and what you feel how you feel those experiences have kind of shaped your opinion and actually is moving you more towards the desire to protect medical liberties. Again, maybe Vivek, you go ahead and start, and then Jen, you can follow in.
Well, I do have, maybe come back to it later. I did have a lot more to say about the pandemic learnings in Ohio specifically, but we have a long time ahead. So I'll tell you a little bit about my background, because I actually do think it's important that people understand it, right? So I was born and raised in Cincinnati. I went to public schools through 8th grade. I went to St. X for high school. I bring up that distinction because of the disparity in how public schools and private schools were treated during COVID. I mean, another example that we could talk about, the disparities between county fairs versus BLM protests, curfews after 10 p.m. versus before 10 p.m., whether public schools infected or private schools infected. We'll get to that. But anyway, I've had both experiences in public and private schools. And then I became an entrepreneur. I actually studied molecular biology in college. That was my major. I thought it was so cool to understand how the human body works, to understand the advent of, modern medicine and how we could make people's lives better. That's what I was really passionate about. And after I graduated, I started my job as an investor in the biotech industry. meeting with all kinds of companies, learning what new technologies were out there. And then I eventually started a biotech company called Roivant that ended up developing medicines in the areas that pharma had abandoned. I started that business in 2014. And Stephanie, I cannot tell you how disliked I was in the pharma industry when I set out to start that business, because the whole point was to call out one of pharma's failures. In this particular case, it was the fact that they, and it's still one of my criticisms of the industry, to be honest, they move with the herd mentality. Okay, so whatever one person says, everyone decides that's the way the pack is going. And it doesn't really look well upon dissent or contrarian views. And my view was there was a whole bunch of therapeutic areas that pharma had actually abandoned, sometimes for pretty unmeritorious reasons, that actually deserved to be resuscitated to help patients. So the long story short, and there's a 7-year history where I was CEO and then I was chairman afterwards. But at the end of the day, when the chips fell down, we have gotten 5 medicines developed that are FDA approved today. One of them is a life-saving therapy in kids with complete Digeorge syndrome. 100% of them die by the age of 3 if they're untreated. And the therapy that we worked on, which is now FDA approved, 70% of those kids are able to now live lives of a normal duration. I think that's pretty awesome. I'm pro-life, but I'm pro-life in every sense of the word, womb to tomb. And I think that that's amazing. And I think that's a miracle of innovation that we should celebrate. I ended up developing medicines for endometriosis, uterine fibroids. These are women's health conditions that were ignored. We also have an approved drug for prostate cancer that we had worked on and developed. And now it's commercialized by a different company. But there was a man who came up to me at actually a recent event at a town hall I was doing just outside of Cleveland. Actually, where were we? We were in Strongsville. And the guy comes up to me afterwards. He said, I came here. I just actually wanted to tell you that I am on the prostate cancer drug that you developed, and it is helping me. And I wanted to say thank you for that. So for me, that was one of the more gratifying parts of my career. And I think helping people live better lives is something that I care incredibly about. But one of the things I also learned is a lot of the failures of the pharma industry, including, I would say, a broader cultural intolerance for dissent in the way that the government and the pharma industry together view dissenting viewpoints. I think it has to be a much more open-minded industry going forward. And I was one of the biggest champions and voices for it. And one of the areas where my view was different from a lot of my peers was actually something I dedicated a chapter to Woke Inc. about. I don't know if you actually read that full book ever. I know Jen did. That's how she and I met. But one of the things that I have been a longtime advocate for, and President Trump in his first term finally at least took a step forward in codifying it into law, is the right to try. The idea that if you have a life-threatening or even any kind of debilitating disease, that you, with your own information, in conjunction and consultation with your physician or your healthcare provider, should be able to access a therapy, even if it involves you assessing independently what the benefits and costs of that therapy really are, without the government getting in the way of your decision with your healthcare provider. That's what I call right to try. I've been probably one of the biggest advocates, maybe the biggest advocate for it coming out of the biotech and pharma industry. And I still am today, and I will be as the governor of Ohio. So just one example of where my industry experience definitely informs some of my policy views. But I am not in the camp of those who say, well, biotech or pharma automatically equals bad if you've had anything to do with it. No, to the contrary, I think that helping people's lives and saving people's lives is a good thing, and it can be done the right way. But just because the rest of the farm industry operates in ways that people may not approve of in general, doesn't mean that there isn't a better way to do it. And that's where I come from.
That's great insight. That's great.
That's
Jen,
awesome. Well, I have a long history, but I start out with the fact that I'm a combat veteran. I've had 5 anthrax vaccines. And when I started out in the legislature, I was very pro-vaccine. And I have been, because of my training as an advanced practice nurse, very pro-pharma. Before I became a nurse practitioner, I sold Prozac for Eli Lilly and was top 2% of the nation, managing a $3 million territory. So seeing the research, and I believe that Prozac was the gold standard, the morality part I saw. I felt like the validity of treatments definitely are there. There are life-saving drugs like the ones that Vivek developed. Those matter, and the research that pharma does is good. But I'm not going to lie, I had a woman praying for me for 40 years that I would wake up to the evils of pharma, but I also see, like Vivek said, there is a positive side, and I think that we have to guard coming from a completely negative view. For me, I was very pro-vaccine, so I was a sub-investigator for Operation Warp Speed, starting with monoclonal antibodies and then transitioning over to 2 of the 3 major vaccines that came out onto the market. Seeing the inside of that research is what caused me to pause, but also learning about OAMF and other people that have had side effects. I was very pro-vaccine. But through watching COVID and how it all came about, my mother's own stroke after her 3rd COVID vaccine, these things wake you up. And I think that it's fair to be a critical thinker, not critical at every thought, but critical because you thought you believed something and now you're seeing something different. We need to reevaluate, which is what happened to me. I went vaccine zealot, feeling that if you didn't get all your vaccines, you weren't healthy, to where we are today, believing that you have the right to choose whether you get one or you don't get one. These are irreversible treatments that go into your body. That's where I am today. And so I think it's fair to be able to say that anyone can change, that our views can change, and mine did.
Yeah, I think, you're the perfect example of that. I don't think there is no champion greater than you on this issue. To start out with, kind of thinking we were the crazy anti-vaxxer crew, to now just linking arms with us on the liberty issue. It's been an amazing transformation for me to watch personally, and I'm sure it has been for you too. And same with Vivek. He sort of explained it as like the villainization of a general. It's just like saying, well, all cops are bad. If one cop does a bad thing, all cops are bad, right? And there is that propensity for people to, if something harmed them, and it's, in fairness, with our viewership, we have a lot of vaccine injured followers, right? So, I mean, the fact that a technology was also used that was absolutely catastrophic for their families, it's easy to understand why they would be like, oh no, they're going to do whatever because they worked for, they had a company for that. But the reality is, biotech is much more than vaccines. Pharma is much more than vaccines. And there is a place for pharmaceuticals in society. And we can't just throw the baby out with the bathwater. But as long as people are acknowledging that these harms have occurred and they always support choice, I think that's what's so important.
And Stephanie, can I say one word on this actually, just for your audience? And I think one of the mistakes I sometimes make when running for governor is that I assume that if I have said something in the past, like I've written extensive books, right? Most people who run for governor haven't done that. Right? I've written 4 books. I ran for president. One of my mistakes, I have to admit, is that I feel like if I've said something in the past, that automatically everyone must have heard it. And that's obviously not the case. And so, maybe I haven't said this enough, but when I ran for president in the GOP primary, this is the GOP primary, there was only one candidate on that debate stage who said that I favored repealing the special liability exemption for vaccine manufacturers that actually in that case was signed into law by a Republican. It was Ronald Reagan.
Yep.
And that was me. Of every Republican who ran for US president in 2024, I was the only one who told the country in real time, to whatever 50 million people were watching it, that was something that I was going to repeal if I was elected as president. I think that that's important just for people to understand. That wasn't some ancient history. That was a couple of years ago. But
yeah, I was actually watching that live, and they cut the feed.
Yeah, I didn't want to mention that because then people will start, but because maybe it was an accident, but it was really funny because actually they did cut the feed. So I don't know what to make of that. It was literally online. And so maybe that's why people didn't see me say it. But regardless, I do think
for
that,
mentioning that.
I just want people to know what my background and what my positions, we all learn over time from our experiences, but in many cases also I have been in my position for medical freedom and a level playing field across industries. and this will affect maybe some of the other issues we talk about too. I don't like special favoritism for any industry, right? I like true competition. I like true freedom, true liberty. I like capitalism, not crony capitalism. And there's a difference between the two. Mm-hmm. And anyway, I just wanted to mention, I think it's important people know where I'm at, where I've been at on some of these issues.
Yeah, absolutely. It was very impressive when you said that. I was very excited, and then they cut the feed, and I said, well, we all know why they did that. So
I like what you said, Vivek, about us learning from our past opinions too, and being willing. When you mentioned Fauci just doubled down on a lie. When we realize that we've changed, I think it's so important to understand we all evolve. We evolve in thought, and we evolve this way. And for me, I definitely have had a huge evolution in this place. And I love how your stance was on reversing those liabilities. I mean,
look, I wish, and this is in the context of the race I'm running, but I wish Amy Acton would have evolved. And instead, what you see from her is, even in a podcast like the one we're having, during this campaign, not back in 2021 or 2020, during this campaign, she's telling Sean O'Brien on a podcast that the COVID death rate was 50, not 15, 50% in the first year of the pandemic, when we all know it was less than 1%. And so I think, to me, that is really one of the most damning parts about my opponent's legacy, is not the poor decisions she made or the poor decisions that she advised the state to make. And we could talk about this, pushing for reopening the economy while she was in favor of locking it down. Different people can be wrong at different times. The problem is the failure to at least reckon with and admit those mistakes and learn from them, as opposed to doubling down on and then exaggerating facts. Now she says the public doesn't remember this was half a decade ago. Maybe I'll just tell them it was 50% in the first year of the pandemic. That's insane. That would be like Ebola, right? And I think that's, to me, that's the deeper failure, to say that, okay, lockdown or not, drawing a distinction between young children and older people in nursing homes, to say that, no, Ohio is going to be the first state in the country to lock down public schools, by the way, while leaving private schools open, right? Cincinnati public schools
and
were
our
closed
elections.
for 2 years. And our elections, over defying a judge's
clinics.
order. By the way, county fairs. You think about what I'm visiting now, outdoor county fairs. When we knew the differential risks of outdoor spread versus indoor spread, even if you're on our campus pro-freedom, at least you might draw those distinctions between indoor and outdoor. Outdoor county fairs wanted to shut them down, but a different outdoor activity, BLM protests on the city streets of Columbus and Cleveland, perfectly fine, all in the name of science. And to me, that is why I am really sympathetic to the idea that voters out there in our state, and frankly across our country, don't trust anybody anymore. That's right. They went to YouTube. We were censored. If you said the kind of things we're saying right now, this would have been censored back in 2020 and 2021. You had public health leaders, Republican and Democrat, by the way, bipartisan basis, telling you to shut up, sit down, do as you're told, that you're a crank, that you're loony. If you say things that now, a few years later, we realize were actually, in many cases at least, true. And we would have come to those conclusions sooner if we were allowed to talk about it. And the irony in the experience for me, full circle, and I'll put aside my personal frustration with it. I have some frustration because I'm a human being, but as a leader of the state, I'm understanding of the fact that even when people look at me now as a Republican or look at somebody else as a Republican and say, well, I don't believe any of you guys. For me, partly that's frustrating because I've been the advocate of highlighting these issues.
Amen.
But in my capacity as a leader, I get it and I understand it. And I think that in the end, our actions will speak louder than our words. And I will only be able to act in accordance with my convictions in leading the state after I'm elected. But the best I can do in the meantime is at least to, frankly, convey where I've been at and what I'm going to do once we're elected. And that's what I'm trying to do in the months we have left.
I love that because, Vivek, we look different, but both of us have an R behind our name, but both of us are different than the administration that led during COVID. And just because they were perhaps some R's in that administration does not make you the same as the past. It doesn't make us exactly the same, but we are standing for truth and liberty and freedom, and that's who we are. And I really appreciate you saying that.
I do. I do too. I think that's a really important message to drive home. Okay, so I know we want to get into a little bit of the past because we said
Sure.
we were going to talk about the past. Specifically, one of the major concerns that our community, the medical freedom community, has come out and expressed. So I want to go over this. I want to get this out there and have this conversation. This is regarding the stance that you had, Vivek, early on regarding natural immunity. There was a podcast you were on. It was in April of 2020. You proposed antibody testing as the likely best option to get us out of the lockdown sooner. Many believe your statements indicated you would approve of a vaccine passport system. I don't agree with that, but I'd like you to be able to get out kind of where you were at with that in the situation, and how, what if someone wasn't immune, what would your stance been? Would you have supported any kind of a vaccine mandate if someone was not immune? I think we need to really clear the air on that one.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I need people to do, though, is to actually think and follow facts, okay, rather than, whatever narrative the last person fed you on a comment thread on social media. And I think that's
Sure.
a challenging thing to do. But let's start with the first fact you mentioned, Stephanie. What month was that?
April of 2020.
Of 2020. Okay, not 2021, April of 2020. So this is about 2 months after COVID had come to the United States from China. And this is in April, long before there was even any discussion or prospect of a vaccine, any legitimate prospect of there even being an idea of a vaccine. That's the point we're talking about. And so there was no discussion of vaccine mandates or passports. And to be crystal clear, my position is and remains that any COVID vaccine mandates were wrong. They were wrong on liberty principles, but even more importantly, they were wrong on the science, which is to say that normally the FDA says you have to take 10 years to develop a vaccine. And if you develop it in 9, it's not safe enough to take. But here to say that if something was eventually, when it did get developed, it was developed in whatever it was, less than 10 months, and you have to take it, that doesn't make any sense. It's contradictory. And a lot of people understood that and saw through it. So I was dead set against the COVID vaccine mandates, even when that topic came up. That was like a year and a half later or a year later. Mm-hmm. In April of 2020, where were we? The economy was locked down. Okay. And by the way, I wasn't in a position of authority. I was not in public office. I was not in public elected office of any kind. I was not seeking elected office. I was a businessman. But what I did care about is reopening the economy. To me, it was painful to watch us do in real time. It's like you're watching a train wreck of economic damage that is going to inflict harm on the U.S. economy. And I don't think this is exaggeration to say this. That harm is what resulted in the money printing effort that then created the inflation that people are suffering today. So the affordability concerns of today, grocery prices, the cost of living, that is directly, and I wrote a piece about this in the Wall Street Journal in the last month or so, that is directly a consequence of those post-pandemic COVID policies that were themselves the consequence of the lockdowns. So as a businessman, I haven't been right about everything, but I believe, if I may say so myself here, the right instincts to say that we're watching a slow motion train wreck. We need a path to reopening this up, or else we're going to cause so much damage that you then need a Fed and a fiscal response to that's going to cause more damage. That was my view all along. And so the most basic thing I thought we could do, okay, should we have just unleashed the economy overall? Yeah, I think that actually would have been the right answer. In the end, we would have gotten through the pandemic more quickly. I think that would have been the right policy response in April of 2020. Easy to say that today. That was also my instinct at the time, but that is not where we were. It is anywhere not near where we were. We were under government mandated lockdowns. So for me, at the time, trying to think creatively in ways that could be pragmatically acceptable to policymakers, but as a guy who knows a thing or two from the biotech industry to offer a suggestion, what I said is, look, here's what we know. Most people who are infected with the virus are either asymptomatic, that means they don't know they have it, or they were really, really mildly ill. That was like the overwhelming majority of people who were infected with COVID-19, even in that early phase. So what if we had a system that said, instead of locking down everybody, there's going to be a really reasonably significant portion of the population that's been infected and didn't even know it. Why don't we just let them out? At least at minimum, wherever you are on lockdowns. And I tend to be against, others tended to be for, But wherever you are on lockdowns, does it make sense to at least let the people with natural immunity back to living a normal life? At the time, I thought the answer was yes. And to be honest with you, Stephanie, even to this day, years later, thinking about it, I actually still think the answer is yes. I think that would have been a totally reasonable response. And one of the things that to this day bothers me deeply, okay, as a resident of this state, as a citizen of this country, is to watch the likes of Anthony Fauci, or in our state, the likes of Amy Acton, put on a white coat, get in front of the camera, earn all of the fame and the joy that comes from that. You see it in Fauci's diary. You saw it in the way Acton conducted herself. They were basking in that glory. To wear the white coat that says that I'm a scientific authority, I've read the science and thought about this. In her case, not once to mention even the possibility of letting people with natural immunity back. That to me is a scientific failure and a moral failure, a dereliction of responsibility to actually just do the basic work of thinking about the facts, actually following the real science rather than the narrative of the science. And that's where I was, and that's where I am today. And should any of that be mandated? In an ideal world, no. Okay, but what was mandated at the time was lockdowns. That's where the country was, and that's where the state was in April 2020. And, John Husted could tell you this. I was calling him, advocating regularly one way or another. How do you reopen the economy? That should be the number one focus. That was the extent of, he was the one person I knew in the government who I would repeatedly give that message to. And in a way that was trying to be helpful to provide paths, they say, let natural immunity be at least a great first step to start. I thought that was reasonable at the time. And I actually think it's pretty reasonable even looking back in retrospect. But others are entitled to have different opinions, but that's what my perspective is.
Yeah, Jen, maybe you can speak to that too, because you certainly had an interesting experience when natural immunity was brought up as well.
Sure. And I really appreciate what you said, Vivek. I really believe that when our healthcare workers went from heroes to zeros because they had that immunity, probably because they were saving lives from COVID, and then they were mandated the vaccine because they were told, and I was told by the Ohio Department of Health and the current Dr. Vanderhoff, that natural immunity was substandard compared to the vaccine. So he said the vaccine gave superior immunity, but we know in healthcare and through our experience that, like varicella, for instance, that happens to be a virus that once you get it, you're not going to get chickenpox again, at least. And we knew that natural immunity was a thing. And in the trials, we often found people had antibodies prior to getting their shots. So it was really difficult in the analysis of the vaccine to say that they had immunity from the vaccine, or was it natural immunity because they already had antibodies? We knew this was going on in January 2021. And yet those that led our Ohio Department of Health said, no, everyone needs to get the vaccine that has superior immunity. But yet again, back to your point about learning, and as we process along the continuum of this disease that we dealt with, we should have been able to backtrack and say, wait a minute, that might not have been correct. Let's correct our course and let's move toward liberty and freedom, especially in a state where we have billions and billions of GDP, and we affect, quite frankly, the world, the nation for sure, other countries.
Were you in the legislature then, Jen? You were, right?
In January 2021, I was sworn in January 4th or 5th, and it was 3 weeks later. I was on a working group because I was part of Warp Speed with the ODH, and the director kept saying he was going to send me studies. But you see, Vivek, I was in the trials. I was a sub-investigator in the trials, and so I had seen things like vaccinating pregnant women. You know that we don't experiment because of GDP, good clinical practice, GCP. We do not experiment on pregnant women. Those things are the things that made me evolve. Besides Dr. McCullough and others, I was a vaccine zealot studying the COVID vaccine and believed for many weeks prior, before I changed and evolved about 5 weeks in to my time in the legislature, I believed in the rollout of Elders First, and then the next age group and the next age group. And my own mother had 3 vaccines. That was not my choice to make for her. It was her choice to make. And again, even if it's our family, I tried to get her to wait. She didn't want to. And when she passed away of a massive stroke after her third shot, I had to say, it was not my choice to make, as hard as it was and as much as I want my mom to be here. Freedom means you get the choice to decide what you're going to do regarding your body and medical treatments and irreversible vaccines that you put into your body. That
Jen, you agree with my position on natural immunity having been at least a reasonable basis, right? For reopening the economy. Yeah.
And we saw, honestly, when their labs came back, that a lot of people that were in the trials actually had antibodies in their blood prior to the vaccine. So the final analysis says to me, and again, I didn't do the analysis. I was just a collector of data, right? The analysis says, did the vaccine work, or was it because they already had natural immunity and then got the vaccine? I can't tell you that when they did the data analysis in that case, that they removed those who already had natural immunity. So if they had natural immunity, but they gave credit to the vaccine because they didn't get the disease, how do we know? We don't know, because they removed the arm of the people that did not get the vaccine. So the placebo arm was removed, and some in the placebo arm had antibodies, but some in the vaccinated arm had antibodies, and we don't know how it would have turned out if we'd removed that variable.
And I think, speaking to the natural immunity portion, and of course, OAMF wouldn't ever support a mandatory testing system. We didn't support anything mandatory, of course.
Correct.
However, I do agree. I agree that if people that had natural immunity had just been roaming around, okay, let's say it was even under the tyrannical, everyone's going to get tested, and we had to resist testing. Let's say that was what played out. I wouldn't have agreed with it, but the reality is, people would have been realizing so much sooner that, oh my gosh, like, we're not all just dropping dead. This isn't as bad as I thought. Not only that, there wouldn't be as much of a force of the vaccine onto people later on, because as Jen said, even the healthcare providers were having it forced on them. I think it would have reduced public panic. It would have also, for the people that did want the vaccine, it would have been more available to the people that did want it, and the people that didn't want it shouldn't have ever had to take it in the first place. So it's just that way of doing things would have, I believe, ended the pandemic sooner, and it would have resulted ultimately in less vaccine injury, because if we had accepted natural immunity as a real thing, which it always has been, then people would not have been, one, running to the shot on their own, and two, they would have been much more likely to stand up against mandates if they did encounter them. So,
and Stephanie, yes, let me just say, like, my perspective, to be crystal clear, and I think we're actually saying all actually in agreement on it, the natural immunity was the right path forward. And the ideal system, certainly we could say it today, would have been giving people the choice. Okay, if you have clear antibodies, you are obviously totally fine to resume normal life. None of us would have wanted lockdowns, but in a world where we had lockdowns, that makes a lot of sense. And if in communicating that there's any ambiguity to say that, well, that should be mandatory, that's wrong, okay? Whether it's for me or anybody else. But what I will say is this: what was mandatory was the lockdown at the time in April of 2020.
Right.
That's
So
right.
I think this is one of the things that for me was different from being an author, right? Or being a commentator, to now move into actually leading, is what are we actually going to do? What are we actually going to lead? And to me, it is, I don't want to take those constraints for granted, because as a commentator, you have to say, okay, well, I'm, providing advice from the peanut gallery as one businessman among many. They've already locked down the economy. I want to reopen it. I'm trying to work within their constraints to say, okay, well, here's one path you have to do it. To me, that's one of the things I reflect back on to say that, you know what, I can actually do a lot better of a job if I'm actually in charge, where we don't have to accept the constraint that we're living under a lockdown in the first place, in which case we would have just done everything very differently. So that's why I look at it.
Can we talk about the ridiculousness and the fact that all Ohioans know, as critical thinkers, that the virus doesn't go dormant at 10 p.m.? That in and of itself.
That's a great example. I mean, Jen, that is a great example. And this is the lesson from the pandemic. In the name of following the science, they actually betrayed real science.
The science,
So Acton signs this curfew for 10 p.m. Somehow, I know it was lab engineered in China, but guys, come on. They didn't engineer it by nocturnal versus diurnal, okay, right? This is not that type of virus. At 10:05, the virus activates. Come on.
That's right.
And Jen, to your point, same thing, public schools versus private schools. So somehow it only infects kids or teachers in public schools, but not in private schools. What public schools shut down, but private schools don't.
That's right.
It is, and I think, or by the way, outdoor, county fair, it's going to infect you so much so that Amy Acton said she has to quit if they tell her to reopen the county fairs, which she did quit. Versus BLM protest, totally fine. Yeah. I'm sorry, the Chinese did not engineer the virus that precisely to say that it only goes after conservatives in church or at county fairs, but not after left-wing agitators at BLM protests. It didn't do that, right?
That's right.
And so I think it's worth.
Don't forget the height requirement. Remember, sitting down versus
standing and sitting. That's right. If you were standing, you had to wear a mask. If you were seated, you didn't have to. Oh my goodness.
And Stephanie, this is not like theoretical anymore. This is not some sort of retro walk through memory lane for the sake of memory lane. This is the election that we have this year, is the woman who led Ohio worse than Fauci, I would argue, to these boneheaded policies that are just scientifically indefensible. And to this day has not issued an iota of at least humility or apology for any of those mistakes, but doubled down by saying the viral death rate was 50%.
That's right.
That's the woman on the ballot versus somebody who, I'm not trying to toot my own horn here. I'm just telling you, frankly, is the most pro-liberty, pro-conservative governor this state will have ever had. And some people may say, well, that bar is too low. And maybe they're right. Okay, but that's the choice that we have. And this is not some theoretical, like we're talking on a podcast and people can muse about history. This is not theoretical. This is a choice for Ohio's future that's in less than 90 days from when we're having this conversation, less than 60 days when the early voting on that decision begins. And I just want people to be able to make the decision, especially those in the medical liberty community, the medical freedom community, to be able to make a decision that will affect their lives and affect their deeply held convictions. That's what's on the ballot. And I do worry that, I think that people may not have yet, we still have 90 days left, but have not yet woken up to the stark nature of not only the contrast, but the impact on their lives and everything they care about. That's what's on the ballot.
Can I say Governor Ramaswamy will be healing to healthcare? Healthcare was decimated during COVID. And a Governor Ramaswamy is going to give the science to the providers who are dealing with their patients back where it belongs. That consent, that relationship in the exam room between a physician and their patient. The people that are not getting their preventive care right now because their lack of belief in the healthcare system, I believe a Governor Ramaswamy is going to be what we need to return healthcare back to the excellence that we're so used to in Ohio. I don't think we've recovered. And that's another reason we need you.
I appreciate that. And I'm not going to be some here just defender of the Republican Party for the sake of, defending the Republican Party. I think we need a fresh, clean start, period.
Yep.
Okay, start with a clean slate, coming from the outside, first principles, listen to the people, follow the data. That's where we need to go. And that's certainly what I'm committed to. And I'm happy to talk more about what's ahead on issues ranging from medical liberty to other issues we hear about. I know property taxes or data centers may not directly fit your audience's core topics, Stephanie, but I'm happy to talk about those as well. This is a fork in the road, and I just think it's really important, not for me. Okay, my life is not going to be better for being governor. I swear that to you. Okay, it should be obvious for anybody who knows what that job is and
anyone
what we've been
in
blessed with.
politics knows
But
that.
But for the state and for the people of the state, I don't think there's been a more important election in our lifetime, probably in history of Ohio, between somebody who is a command and control Fauci-esque socialist versus somebody who really believes in the true founding principles of liberty. And, in the end, the government we elect is the one we deserve, right? That's the lesson from our founding fathers. And it's almost as if they were, warning us to pay attention in this year in Ohio.
Yeah. And I think, and the reason we're here and the reason that the party and the grassroots are so frustrated is because we probably weren't paying good enough attention for a while. And we elected a lot of people that weren't representing us. And now it's become the majority. And now we're having to fight back to reclaim our government for the people. And that takes time. And this governor race is a big step towards that movement. We just have to make sure that people really know who you are and understand where you are, so that they can feel confident getting out to the polls, because I can't imagine my life, OAMF, like us being able to move policy. I cannot imagine what that looks like under Dr. Lockdown. So this is a very, very, very critical race to our community. Getting into the kind of governor you'll be, I think that's a great kind of segue here to go off and mention the former CDC director, Robert Redfield. He has multiple times stated over the past year that there will be another pandemic on the horizon. It's not a matter of if, but it's when. It's highly likely it could be bird flu or some other national outbreak could happen during the next governor term. Okay, I want you to think about that, people. Sometime in the next 4 years, we could have a pandemic. Vivek, why don't you walk us through that announcement of, oh my gosh, such and such, there's an outbreak. What are you going to do as governor? What is that going to look like under your leadership?
Yeah, look, it comes down to the key principles and learnings, frankly, from COVID. Number one, the first thing, before everyone's running helter-skelter, running around with their chicken's head cut off, right? None of that mentality. First is the North Star. Our Constitution was made for moments like these. We have to remember that. That is the North Star, is what makes our country distinct from every other country in the history of humankind.
Absolutely.
And we have to tie ourselves to that mast. Okay, that's number one. The job of a leader is to say that I'm tying myself to that, and constrained by the principles in the Bill of Rights and our US Constitution, what decisions are we going to make? And I think one of the things that I do a little differently, maybe to a fault, okay, relative to other politicians and even other CEOs, is I like to get into the actual scientific detail and data myself. In an emergency situation like that, or a so-called emergency situation like that, I don't want to delegate that responsibility to somebody else. Because one of the things I've noticed in my career, including in running businesses, but definitely we saw this happen during COVID, is you had a governor or a political figure say, I'm going to delegate it to the experts, who then synthesize the actual information in ways that aren't actually necessarily reflective of the underlying data, but are a narrative that they overlay on the data. And so I want to hear from diverse expert perspectives. I think when you are seeking expert advice, and you should make sure you're not trapped in an echo chamber. Think of what would have happened if we listened to Jay Bhattacharya and the other co-authors of the Great Barrington Declaration. We would have been in a very different, and I would say better spot today, and yet they were silenced and castigated. I want a diverse range of expert perspectives, but I'm also not just going to delegate it to the experts. I think as somebody who comes from both a scientific and a business background, and having been blessed with the education and the tools that I've been given, I want to go into the data myself to pressure test individually as a leader to say that that is part of my job, not just to listen and be an instrument of an expert class, but to actually pressure test those decisions based on my personal understanding of the actual facts. And then I think it's my job to, when I communicate with the public, look, I think there's a temptation to tell the public that you know everything, right? That you want to comfort people. It comes from a good place to say that, yeah, here's what I know, and it's all going to be fine, or it's all going to be doom unless you do this. And we know that 100% it's the case, and this is why you got to do what you need to do. I don't actually think that that's the best way to lead. I don't even think it's the most persuasive way of dealing with the public. The way I would lead is looking into a camera like the one I am right now to address the public and tell you, honestly, here's what we know. Here's what we don't know. Here are the things that we're considering doing. Here are the things that we would never do because they would violate your constitutional liberties. And that we are talking to a wide range of experts, and we're diving into the data ourselves to make the best decisions possible. That also provides an opportunity for public input. That also provides an opportunity to hear what the actual facts are on the ground as experienced by people in Ohio. And then leading through that, we don't know. I mean, you asked a theoretical question. Who knows what the contours of that future emergency are, right? It's theoretical. What I will say is that I will commit at every step to say that even if it's on a week-to-week or a month-to-month basis, okay, here's where we were right and here's where we were wrong. And I have the courage and moral obligation to tell you not only where we were right, that's easy to pat yourself on the back, but here's where we might have gotten some things wrong, and here's where we're going to course correct to do what's right for the people of our state. That's the way I would look at leading through, God forbid there's some type of, COVID 2.0 or whatever. I mean, it doesn't leave me feeling very good when you hear definitive proclamations like the one that you read, Stephanie. I'm going to be honest with you. But you asked me a question of whatever the situation is, okay, pandemic or some other emergency that's not health related even. Those are the principles with which I will lead the state as an executive. And, frankly, not in a way that use it as a chance for, owning the libs with Republican talking points. That's not the time for it. I think the point is you have to be objectively tethered to make the right decisions, grounded in the Constitution, transparent with the people you're leading, acknowledging that you're not a god, you're a human being. That means by definition, you will make mistakes, even if they're small ones along the way. Own it, be honest about it, learn from it, adapt, and bring the people with you at every step of the way. And the idea that you can't handle the truth, okay, to quote, Jack Nicholson from A Few Good Men or whatever, right? No, you can handle the truth, actually. We can handle the truth. And that's almost what this country was built on, is the idea that we, the people, create a government that is accountable to us, not the other way around. And I would consider it, and do consider it, my moral duty to lead Ohio in that way. And I'm not running against somebody who generally shares those principles. Okay, I'm running against somebody who in some ways is the exact opposite of everything I just told you, in a way that we don't have to surmise or make up, because that's exactly how she led the state. And more importantly, has not since offered an iota of humility, reflection, or ownership of responsibility for the bad outcomes. And I think that that's disqualifying for somebody who seeks the governorship in my opponent's case. But in my case, you asked me how I would lead. That's how I'm going to do it.
And
Great.
I would wrap it up for future Governor Ramaswamy and say it's the Boy Scout adage and motto: we will be prepared. That's we're going to be prepared under a Vivek Ramaswamy gubernatorial term.
Thank you.
Well, I really appreciate you getting that out there. I think that's really what people need to hear. I think constitutional rights is hitting the nail on the head. That was what was violated, top to bottom. And whether it is a health emergency or any other emergency, liberties are always taken under fear. Typically, that's usually what's used to try to control people, is fear. Public health is an easy tool for that because people are typically afraid to die, right? So that's one of the best tools that can be used. So I think if we always direct ourselves back to the Constitution, we can't ever go wrong, ever.
And they tried with the climate crisis, right? And there'll be something else in the future. But whatever it is, whether it is artificial or whether it is factually true, even if it is factually true, and I reject a lot of the claims of the climate activists, but let's say even if it is true, the Constitution still comes first on principle. Everything else comes downstream of that. That's the way I look at it.
Yeah, absolutely. You've covered a lot. I think you've really made your point, but for some people that just want kind of more of a yes or no answer, I've got a few lined up. I think I know the answer to those already, but I want you to be able to say that for yourself, just for our viewers, for just super and complete and total clarity. Question 1, do you oppose government mandates on vaccines, masks, and medical interventions?
As a general matter, yes. Obviously, the specific facts in COVID. Look, COVID situation, absolutely. You asked about some theoretical future. I would say in general, absolutely. On the masks point, look, this wouldn't have been my decision, but even if our leaders had shown some restraint and said it was in hospital settings or nursing home settings, okay, because we don't know, and those are older settings, and maybe they're effective, maybe they're not, I don't think we'd even be talking about this today. So my view would be no mandates, period. But part of my criticism and also our societal learnings from the last time around is when the leaders use this as an opportunity not to actually follow science, but to use this as an opportunity for social control, that was the real breach and violation of trust. So that's where I'm at.
We knew the majority of masks, too, were surgical masks. Those are not N95 or beyond TB masks, or things that we use to stop micro viruses and things like that. That, again, the science, the people of Ohio looked at it and went, something isn't right here. This is, this is oppression, not suppression of a disease.
Certainly. And the next one, I think we all know the answer to this one, but do you believe patients have the right to access any medication, approved or not approved, that their doctor prescribes as long as they have consented to it?
Not only do I believe it, I am a hardliner and an advocate for it. I consider myself an activist on this issue. On this issue, I'm as much of an activist as you, and I agree with you. Yeah.
Yes, I know. We've had many conversations about right to try expanding what we currently have. So we're definitely on the same boat there. And then lastly, and I think this is really, you've really already hit this too. Do you believe that healthcare professionals should be allowed to engage in open scientific debate without threat to their licensure by government agencies, which we saw and are still seeing today?
Yeah, absolutely. And furthermore, I think it is essential for the progress of science. The actual true scientific method depends on that level of open debate and open inquiry rather than censorship and punishment. And that is probably one of our biggest lessons and learnings from mistakes that America made and mistakes that Ohio made in the COVID-19 pandemic.
Absolutely. Okay, so we've covered pretty much the health stuff pretty well. I think we'd like to maybe just touch on, I'd love to hear you kind of speak a little bit to data centers. That's a huge issue for our community. Of course, we just dropped that HB and 983 recently. We've got a lot of the public is very excited. They're really looking for the government to deal with this data center issue. They have a lot of concerns. So maybe you could, a lot of the sentiment is that, you know, because of your tech background, you want to rubber stamp all of these data centers. You just can't wait for these projects to be dropped everywhere. Why don't you just speak to that a little bit? You know, you haven't set completely on where your policy is going to be, but maybe just give us a bird's eye view of how you feel about that so people can kind of understand a little bit more.
Yeah, I appreciate that opportunity, Stephanie. And that's been my sense. I've been somewhat surprised, even when I've gone to a lot of the county fairs and we open up and take open questions. And as a side note, I'd love to challenge Amy Acton to do the same thing. Notice the Joe Biden style campaign. She doesn't take any voter questions. To the contrary, I'm doing the opposite. But one of the things that has surprised me as I'm going to all the counties, taking completely unscripted open questions is how many people have the impression that I'm somehow pro data center. Like, I just want to be crystal clear. I'm not pro data center. I'm pro Ohio. Am I pro economic growth? Absolutely. I think we need to bring industries ranging from manufacturing to think about even agricultural industry innovation, farmland demand for products like dairy processors and others. There are huge opportunities for economic development. And I do want to lift up high-paying jobs in the state and bring down costs and improve the lives of families economically. That's the number one thing I know how to do as governor. There's a difference between that and saying you're pro data center. And so I just want to be crystal clear on that. The other thing I would say is this issue has changed dramatically over even the last 12 months. There's a lot we have learned. I think there's a lot that even, I think you and others, Stephanie, have helped raise to the forefront that were not even evident 12 months ago. And in the same way that I was talking to you about health policy, we have to follow the facts and have to actually adapt based on what we know rather than pretending like it was 16 months ago when we were dealing in more of a vacuum of information. So here's my perspective on the data center issue. Okay, I think that, and I am going to be rolling out policy soon on this. I'm not somebody who wants to rush something on a fast moving issue like this where a lot has changed. I want to get every set of facts. I want to listen to farmers, to workers, to the organizations that represent workers, to business leaders, to activists, to environmental groups. I have been and am continuing to talk to all of those groups of Ohioans and more. And I have a pretty good sense of where I land on this issue. I'm going to roll this out pretty shortly. But what I will tell you is just lay out the basic principles of how I would govern on this issue. I think there's three basic principles, okay? Number one is you have to pay lower electric bills as a consequence. And I think that's different from saying that we just don't want your electric bills to go up. I predicted this would happen in the spring of 2025 when I declared my run. I said electric bills are going to go up. Maybe data centers can be a good thing, but we got to make sure that electric bills don't go up. That's what I said back then. What we see right now is electric bills have gone up way faster than almost anybody anticipated. And my opponent, Acton, she said, well, electric bills can't go up. Yeah, that's table stakes. I've been saying that for a year and a half. I have a stronger position on that. I think that we have to go so far as to say that if a data center is going to be built in your community, anywhere near you, in your county, your electric bills have to go down. It's not that they can't go up by more than a certain rate. They have to go down. They have to go down meaningfully. And I'm doing some economic analysis on this. I think it could be even much more aggressive than what I'm telling you. But the basic principle is your electric bill has to go down. That's number one. Number two is, again, just basic table stakes. Your property taxes, and that is a top issue in the state, the property tax burden. If a data center is built anywhere near you, your property taxes have to go down. Now, I've laid out a plan for rolling back property taxes to where they were before the end of the pandemic. Next year, there's a ballot measure likely making its way in 2027 to the ballot to eventually eliminate property taxes. We got to be prepared for that. And one of the things we can do is to say that end the property tax abatements, but even going beyond that, if a data center is built anywhere near you, you got to pay lower property taxes. So that's number one, is lower electric bills, not increases, lower electric bills, lower property taxes. And then on the environmental piece of this, air and water quality can be no worse off. You have to use best available technology. And as a separate matter, even from data centers, water quality is a super important, and I would say over-ignored issue in the state by both parties. And so this isn't specific to data centers. This is across industries. Okay, so I don't want to conflate the data center conversation. This is a whole separate conversation for another day. Across industry, water quality is essential. But what I'll say on the data center issue is no special carve-outs from the environmental protections that we have and in some cases need to raise in Ohio across industries. No special exemptions from those requirements for data centers when it comes to air or local water or environmental qualities. So with those principles, lower electric bills, lower property taxes, no special exemptions from air or local air or water quality standards, my view is if you don't meet any one of those criteria, a data center is not going to get built, period. And I think that's the line in the sand that I think we ought to be willing to draw as a state. And conversely, if a data center is built in a community that after the community goes through all of these steps, what do local residents actually benefit from? You have not just not higher electric bills, you have lower electric bills, and you have lower property taxes. And I think that there's even more teeth in this that I think we're prepared to put, but I will save that for when we roll it out. And I just want to be clear on that, because I do think I've never once come out and said, hey, I am pro data center expansion, have a free for all and have at it. Absolutely not. Never said it. But that being said, this is politics. And, I think that our opponents have had some success in trying to paint me that way. Well, to the contrary, it's my job to tell you where I'm actually at. That's where I'm at on this issue. I do hear from a lot of labor groups who also say we want construction jobs coming to Ohio because we want those high-paying jobs in our families and in our state. I'm in favor of that. As I said, I love economic development that raises the quality of life for families. But my job as governor is to ask, how does anything we do, okay, whether it's health policy, whether it's data center policy, whether it's other industrial policy, it's not growth for the sake of just some theoretical academic objective. It is for the sake of what improves the lives of Ohioans, period. That is the only question that I have a moral responsibility to answer and to answer to, is to the Ohioans who are entrusting me to lead this state. That's it. There's no other interest group that matters. That is the only interest group that matters. It's the voters of the state, it's the residents and citizens who live in Ohio. That's it. And so that's what I'm going to lead. Those are my principles on data center policy development. And I have to say also that I actually really appreciate the people who have been vocal about this issue, data centers, about property taxes, about the kinds of issues that otherwise might have gotten swept under the rug if it weren't for on medical freedom, Stephanie, people like you, or people like, I met with separately the tax people, right? You think about Brian Massey, you think about, Sarah there, a number of folks across the state, Marcel Sturbich, people who have said that they're going to stand up for the issues that may not have gotten discussed in Columbus. And I think it is because of those efforts that we're able to arrive more quickly at sensible policies. And so though I haven't embraced as my policy plank that I will eliminate property taxes, what I have laid out is a clear plan to deliver the biggest reduction in property taxes we've ever seen. And if it's a requirement for data centers to help fund that, so be it. We can actually use that to solve the property tax problem too. I would go so far as to say that nobody in Columbus would have been talking about property tax solutions if it weren't for the actual hard work of activists who took that issue on. I would say the same about data centers, right? And I've read the constitutional amendment, right, to just ban data centers outright. I think it's at least my job to read it, right? That's the least I can do. It's well written. It's clear. It has clear definitions. But I think what that has done is it has at least forced every leader to actually ask the question of what is in the interests of Ohioans and what is not in the interests of Ohioans. And to me, that's my North Star, and that's what's going to guide the data center policy rollout that you can expect from me pretty soon. I want to be crystal clear, but it's not going to surprise anybody because it's going to respect the exact principles that I laid out here, and which frankly I have laid out throughout this campaign. And my only ask to people who are listening to this is, don't be a prisoner of what the next person who's trying to dupe you or trick you tries to get you to believe, okay? You may think that you're thinking independently when in fact you're fed information by somebody who had very different objectives and wanted to use you. Don't let them use you as a pawn, and think for yourself, and you're hearing directly from me. This is where I'm at. And I take the commitments I make pretty seriously because I know you're going to play this right back to me in the first day when I'm in office, when we're signing our legislation or our EOs for that matter, something I'll have more to say about as well. That's the way I look at this issue.
Yeah. And that's exactly what citizens need to hear, because the problem with previous leadership is they are interested in everybody else's special interest, but the people's special interest, but the people's interests, right? And that has been the problem. And that is what has been guiding leadership this entire time. And you're absolutely right. I don't think any of these issues would even be would not be top issues for any of the elections if it weren't for the fact that citizens got tired of being ignored in this state by our own party, right?
Yep.
And so they finally took matters into their own hands. So
and can I say one thing about this,
yes.
Stephanie, just because I think you have an appropriately thoughtful and at times healthily skeptical audience. And I think that's good, but it also requires people to think about what somebody's incentive for doing something, okay? Why do those special interests exist? There's a lot of lobbying in Columbus, okay? It just is. I'm not saying it's a good thing, bad thing, it just is, right? Who's my biggest donor to my campain? It's
you.
Me, actually, right? So I'm not making money by doing this, I promise you, okay? I've put over $25 million of my hard-earned money into this campaign, and that won't be the last money that I put into this campaign. Okay, you have to be crazy to be doing this job for any reason other than believing that you can make a positive difference for the state.
Right.
There's no other reason to do it. You don't want to do it for fame. You don't want to do it for a fortune. I love this podcast. I'm sure you have a great listenership, but if you want to reach millions of people across the country and world, there's other ways to do it, right? I'm doing this because I care about the people of my state, the state where I was born and raised, the state where I'm raising my kids, my 3 kids, by the way, and the state that I think can be the greatest state in the United States of America, the country that I love, and the country that I will always pledge allegiance to, that I will die fighting for if I have to. That is why I'm doing this. And so when people think about incentives, for a standard politician who needs, to go, whatever, after whatever special interest push them to do, that's a different game. For me, I am personally invested with my own skin in the game in this. The only reason I care about this is because I believe I don't mean to sound unhumble here, but I'm going to tell you the truth. I don't think there's another person in this state who can lead Ohio to be the state that Texas and Florida look up to rather than the other way around. That's the truth. And if there was somebody else who I believe could bring that level of conservative, high quality leadership to Ohio, I swear to you, my life would be easier if I could take that same money and put it behind them. Okay. Life would just be a lot easier for me and for my family. But I'm doing this because I have a moral duty, given the skills and the experience that I have. I think we can make a real difference. And I just have to win this election to do it. And if the people who share our values, people like those who, frankly, are part of your community and this podcast and fellow activists, grassroots activists in Ohio, if you show up and vote, I'm going to win. And if you don't, I won't. It's that simple. And I think that choice belongs to you, to us, to we the people. And I'll promise to do my part. And if you all do yours, I think we're going to make this state greater than we've ever been, and a state that actually respects the founding liberties and the Constitution on which our great country was built. So let's do it. That's my view.
Yeah, I think it's hard, but we have to take that step. At some point, you have to say, look, I'm going to hold them accountable, right? I mean, that's why we're doing this. If you weren't willing to be held accountable, you wouldn't be bothering, like you said, you wouldn't be bothering to come on this podcast. You would just go out there, you'd tell everyone exactly what they wanted to hear, just real high level, like politicians always do. And then that would be it. And you just run your ads and you'd be done with it. The fact that you are trying to get real input from real people speaks to how you want to lead. It doesn't mean that you're going to get everything right. It doesn't mean that you've ever you've got everything right in the past or to get everything right in the future.
I'm human.
You listen. You listen.
We all are.
You're proving that right now, that you listen. You're proving that you hear new information that matters to the citizens, and that you want to take that, and that you want to work towards meeting their needs, the citizens' needs, and what their concerns are. And you're not just, this is my agenda, this is what I'm going to do. What problem we have is politicians that don't adapt to new information. I'm sure Jen could interject at any time here. And people are so used to not having someone they can trust. This election is very hard for people. It's very, very hard to say, I'm going to step out and I'm going to vote. I don't want to, the people tell me, I don't want to put my trust in anyone else, Stephanie. I'm tired. I've been betrayed. I'm not going to do this again. And I say, this might be your last chance to try.
But COVID did that. COVID caused a far greater distrust in our government. And that's why this election really is going to, with a Governor Ramaswamy, make Ohio great again.
Yes, I think that we know
we will fight for the people of the state. I mean, that is my job. I'm getting there. We will fight for you, for your rights, and for your ability to have a better life. That is why I'm in this. And if you're in my shoes, we have been blessed with more than we could imagine. There's no other reason to do this other than that. But we will fight for you, and I'm confident we will succeed for you. And by the way, I challenge my opponent, Amy Acton, to at least for this campaign, get out and do the same thing that we are, right? She should be on this podcast with you. Why not? She should be at county fairs taking unscripted questions from loose audiences of 100 or 200 people without pre-vetting them. I challenge her to do it because I think that the state deserves people who actually answer to the people. And even if you don't agree with them 100% of the time, at least you deserve a leader who tells you what they actually believe. And that's what I'm trying to do. My opponent is not, but ultimately the beauty of our country is that decision belongs to you, to us, to we the people. And it's not in the distant future. It's in 90 days. And I think that is up to you and up to us. And I'm ready to serve if we get this right.
Yep. And we all know what kind of a future we will have under Amy Acton. It's truly a terrifying future. And you clearly
no
doctor lockdown. And you clearly want to follow the Constitution, and you want to set good policy, and you are going to listen to the people. So I encourage everyone to get out to vote. However you're voting, obviously, we wanted you to see Vivek more on this issue because it hasn't been out there as much. So I think we've accomplished that. And I know Vivek's open to further questions. If anybody has other questions for him, he'd be happy. I mean, maybe we can even do a sit down with some folks if there's, maybe some people that want to dive a little deeper into something in a private meeting or whatever. I know Vivek would be open to that. So please just remember how important this election is. Think about, we've got our kids, our futures. Everything is kind of depending on how this state goes. And if we fall under Democrat socialist leadership of Amy Acton, I don't know what our state will look like in 4 years. It's truly a terrifying.
Or what our nation, since we're the 5th largest state in the union, what is our nation going to look like if we get a doctor lockdown?
Absolutely. Well, I appreciate you, Vivek. If you have any last closing comments to leave with our viewers, you can go ahead and do that now. I know you probably got a busy schedule today.
No, this is important to me. I appreciate people, if they really made it to the end of this, thanks for taking the time and caring enough. And you don't have to care about the future of the state. I get that. You do it because you actually are a lover of this country and a lover of Ohio. in the people of our state and our country. That's why, if you listen to this whole thing by the end, that's why you're doing it. And I just want you to know, putting yourself in my shoes, that's why I'm doing it too. And so it's my job to fight for you. If I'm given the chance, I will, but I have to be given the chance in order to do it. And that's why I'm asking for your help. So thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, Rep. Gross, for being on and contributing to this conversation too. I know everybody really appreciates all you've done for this state. And even though we still are working on some of these bills getting done, I appreciate that you still come back every assembly and you continue to fight for this, and we'll get it done. And maybe we'll get lucky and Vivek will be able to sign some of these bills into law finally.
It's always an honor to stand for freedom and liberty. Always. Always.
Thanks, you guys. I appreciate you so much. Have a good day.
Thank you.
See ya.